Welcome to the OESD virtual embroidery event in the Hoop Quilting with Kelly. Hey, that's me. Have you ever wanted to quilt with your embroidery machine but got overwhelmed and didn't know where to start? Well, stick around and I'll show you how fun the process can be, and I'll demonstrate some great techniques to help you get those quilts finished. So there are several types of quilting designs. There's triangles, squares, borders, corners, and edge-to-edge or pantographs. From your feedback, we recognize that you are most interested in learning about edge-to-edge quilting. So let's talk about what edge-to-edge quilting actually is. Let's talk terminology. These terms come from the world of long arm quilting and have specific meanings for that process. Pantographs are quilting patterns that are stitched across the quilt top. The quilting's done side to side, top to bottom, and over the entire quilt without regard to the pieced or applique design of the top. So edge to edge is another term for pantograph, and that quilting is a single design that covers the entire quilt top. It's sometimes referred to as an all-over design as well. Edge-to-edge designs span the entire width of your quilt, but repeats the same design for each row. So basically, we have two different names for the same thing in machine embroidery. So if you look at this quilt here, the pattern is right here, the two little ducks. And so we start in the middle, we go out and throughout the whole thing, and it covers the entire quilt. OESD designs have two different names. There's continuous line or pantograph. So they basically work the same way. They have starting and ending points that are on the same plane. So if you look at this quilt, the starting and ending are right along the same area so that it's easy to start and stop designs. They can be a single stitch or a triple stitch, and so I have a sample of that here. It's a cute little owl. This is a single stitch, so that is a very lightly digitized design, and that's when you want more of the quilt, the piecing to show. And then the triple stitch, which is here, it goes back and forth over it 3 different times. That's when you really want to showcase the quilting, so you could pick between whichever one that you want, and the majority of our designs have both of those included in them. There's also borders and corners that are continuous lines. So as you can see here, you have your corners and then you have your borders, and so those all connect up so that you're able to complete your quilt. So quilting stitch types, there's many different types. There's single stitch, triple stitch, red work, and double run. So single stitch, just like I said before, is a single stitch, and it's similar to what you would do if you were free motion quilting on your sewing machine. So it's just one long stitch connected all the way through. Then you have triple stitch, which goes back and forth over the same stitch 3 different times. And so that really gives you a dramatic difference in the look of the stitch. You can really see that design well against the fabric. Next, I want to talk about the products that you're going to need to do in the hoop quilting. And there's actually no need for stabilizer when you're quilting, which is really great. The batting, the backing, and the top are more than sufficient to hold all of the stitching. And then that way you don't have to worry about tearing stabilizer away from all of the quilting in the back of your hoop. However, when you're doing edge to edge and regular quilting, you want to make sure that you have plenty of backing to go around so that you're able to hoop it. But if you don't want to waste all that fabric, we have a couple of really great stabilizers that you can use as an alternative to adding fabric around the edges. So the first one I want to talk about is Ultra Clean and Tear Fusible. This is a fantastic stabilizer for this project. You can iron it onto the edges of your backing, and then you're able to hoop it and you can embroider on it. And because it's a tear away, wash away, it can be easily sprayed with water and removed super easily. Then next we have Ultra Clean and Tear Plus. This is a very large roll, which is really nice when you're doing a larger quilt. You have those bigger pieces to work with. So Ultra Clean and Tear Plus is the same as Ultra Clean and Tear Fusible, except that it has a water-soluble adhesive on it. So whenever you hear the word plus on our stabilizers, that means that stabilizer has that water-soluble adhesive on it. So this one you would just pull the paper off of and you would stick it to your backing fabric, and then you're able to hoop it just as you would with the fusible. So either one of those works great when you're quilting in the hoop. Next is Stable Stick Tearaway template sheets. And so these are fantastic because it's all in where you place the embroidery design. And so if you have a template of the embroidery design, you're able to really get accurate placement of your designs. And so what you would do is you would print your design at full size on the template sheet. And then you also want to print crosshairs for that as well. These are the Stable Stick tearaway template sheets are really great for quilting and also for borders. Also, you can use it for garments as well. And it's that you're able to preview the design. So the template stays put until you remove it. It's translucent so you can see through it. There's no residue left behind, so you can leave this on your quilt for however long you need to, and it's not going to affect your quilt. They're also repositionable, so you can use them multiple times. I usually can use one template for quite a while before I have to print another one. You can print these on inkjet or laser printers, but this is not a stitchable product, so make sure you're not using this as a stabilizer at any time. So I've got my template printed, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get ready to quilt. All right, the needles that you want to use are going to be a 7511 sharp that you're going to use for quilting. So the sharp tip of the needle will pierce the fibers wherever it lands, so it really makes a perfect straight stitch as you go. You want to replace those needles after 5 to 6 hours of actual sewing time. And also the larger eye of an embroidery needle prevents thread breakage and fraying of the thread. We actually are doing all of our quilting with a 40 weight polyester thread, but you certainly can use other types of threads as well. We also sell our embroidery, Oregon embroidery needles in a titanium coating, so those last a lot longer. You can replace them after about every 25 to 30 hours, and they're actually available in sizes 7511, 8012, and 9014. And then the Perfect Snips. These are one of my favorite little scissors. They are it's a little squeeze action, so it's very easy to get in and cut the threads while it's in the hoop. Has this little hook right here. I don't know if you can see it or not, but we'll put up a slide so you can really see that well. But that little hook, you can get under little threads that are caught maybe, and you're able to cut right up next to the fabric, so it makes it really nice for all types of quilting and embroidery. All right, so speaking of thread, we do a lot of quilting with isocord embroidery thread. It's a 40 weight polyester, and what I love about it is it comes in 423 colors plus variegated colors. I don't know if you can see this or not, but this little quilt was quilted with a variegated isocord. So it just gives that a really subtle change in the colors of the thread as you stitch. But it's a nice strong thread. It's color fast, bleach safe, and it doesn't have any dye lots. So you can certainly do your quilting with cottons, polyester, rayons, whatever it is that you want to use. But for today, I'll be using the isocord threads. And Expert Embroidery Tape Tearaway, one of my favorite products as well. But the tearaway tape is wonderful for when you're quilting off the edge of the quilt. You want to tape that edge, and we'll do that in just a little bit, so that the needle, the presser foot doesn't get caught in that edge. So the tearaway tape, you tape that along the edges, and it's super easy to take off. It doesn't leave any residue on your fabric, and it comes 2 rolls to a pack. Last but not least, and I'm going to move this out of the way real quick, is our Grippy Grid. This is a wonderful helper. It is it's a silicone hooping mat, and so it actually grips your hoop so that your hoop doesn't slide all over the table. So it makes it really easy to hoop your quilts. So let me pull one out here so you can see what it actually does. Okay, and so you would take this, let me get a hoop, and you would place your hoop on the mat, and then it holds that hoop in place. You take your inner hoop out, lay your quilt in, place the inner hoop in it, and then you're ready to go. And just makes your hooping a whole lot easier. This is not a cutting mat, so make sure you don't cut on it, but it does have some great lines on it to line things up as you're hooping. All right, next we're going to talk about sizing designs, and we get lots and lots of questions about that. So quilting designs are actually super easy to size because of their low stitch count. They rescale easily in your software or in your machine. So a lot of times, for instance, with this quilt, see if I can get this here without making a mess. These designs needed to be scaled to fit into the particular areas, right? So I had to kind of figure out what size I needed my design to put it in there. But if you're doing pantographs, you rarely have to rescale those because you can just quilt past the edges, as I'm going to demonstrate later, and it makes it fine. So for this, this little project right here, I took this little owl and stitched it at normal size, and this is the single stitch, and then I decreased the size in the hoop in the machine 80% to 80%. So I decreased it 20%. And you can see that the design keeps its integrity, looks really good. The stitches are a little bit smaller, but overall I think it looks really, really nice. So don't be afraid to try scaling your designs. And especially if you're doing borders and corners, you're going to have to scale them. So that's just something to keep in mind. And you don't have to have software to do that. You can do it right in your machine. And then let's talk a little bit about the templates. So let me move this over. So you'll have to print a template to get started. It really makes a big difference. So I printed on stable stick template sheets, and then what you want to do is definitely make sure that you have the crosshairs for the centers or the starts and stops, depending on what you're working on. So you have to have some type of software to print a template. And there's lots of good free ones out there, and basically most of the free ones will size, they'll rotate, they'll mirror image, and then they'll actually let you print a template. So you can ask your store staff what they recommend. We also recommend ArtLink. It's a free software that works well with all embroidery formats. So you're going to roughly cut out, let me get my paper scissors here. You're going to roughly cut out your template. And I like to cut really close to my edges here where they start and stop. All right. So I've got that cut out, and then there is what you want to do. There's a paper backing, and so you're going to pull that paper backing off, maybe. All right, like so. And then you would stick your template wherever it is that you want to do. And we're going to I'm going to show you how I do that in just a moment. Now you can put this back on the paper, and that way you can save it and use it repeatedly. You want to make sure that you're putting it back on the shiny side, not the dull side. If you put it on the dull side, it's now then stuck permanently to it, and you won't be able to get it off, so you'll have to reprint. So that's the template, and we'll be using that in just a little bit. And then one of the other important things is the PDF of the collection. And so this is a file that we include with all of our collection, and it's your roadmap to success. So let's look at a PDF file. I'll be using the Baby Animals Quilt Pantographs today. And so this is what I printed out. And if you don't want to print things out, you can actually go right to the website or with your download, whatever it is that you have, and you can look at the PDF right there on your screen. So you could use it on your tablet, your computer, whatever. And so the first thing it does is it tells you the collection number, how many designs. So this has 12 designs, but 24 files. And what that means is it comes in single stitch and triple stitch. So you have 12 of the designs in the two different type stitches. And so when you open it up, here it's going to tell you what thread color. Whenever it's a single stitch design or a straight stitch design like this, we always just put black as the basic color. But of course, when you're quilting, you're going to change that color to whatever it is that you want to put on your quilt. And then it will have the different designs. It'll tell you if with the name of it. So this one's the Owl Pantograph Single Run Stitch. It'll tell you the size of it, and also it's in inches and millimeters, and then also the stitch count. And so it's just really helpful to have all this. Now, if this was a different type of project, it would have instructions in it, applique, patterns, all kinds of stuff. But because this is just basic quilting, this is all that you need in here. So I like to make sure that I have this available so that I can make sure I know the size and the stitch count. So let's talk a few tips and a few tricks, and then we'll get started with our stitching. So when you purchase a collection from OASD, it does include that PDF file that I talked about. You'll also receive all the design files in all the formats for all brand machines. Today we're stitching on a Bernina embroidery machine, but our designs work with any embroidery brand. All right, so when you're setting up your machine, you want to thread your machine for sewing, not embroidery. So you want a balanced stitch. When you thread for embroidery, your bottom is always tighter. Your bottom tension is always tighter than your top. So it pulls a little bit of that top thread down to the bottom. With quilting, you want it to be like a sewing stitch. So however it is that you need to change your machine to set it up for sewing is what you need to do. You're normally going to use the same thread, top and bobbin. And then if you can on your machine, you want to turn off the tie-in, tie-off option. All of our designs include those stitches, so you may not have that option. I'm not really sure. You need to check with your dealer. And then thread, like I said earlier, any good quality thread can be used. Cotton quilting thread, isocord, rayons, whatever it is that you want to use. So the batting that you're going to use, I prefer a low loft batting, honestly, because it's harder to hoop a quilt that has a really high loft bat in it, but you certainly can use those. It just takes a little bit more strength in your hands, I guess. You might need to raise your presser foot height just a little bit. There are some stabilizer battings available, but you really don't have to use those. I mostly use warm and natural, or I like a bamboo batting as well. Now batting does produce a lot of lint, so make sure that you're cleaning your machine regularly. Before I start my project, I usually change my needle, I clean my machine, and I make sure that it's oiled and ready to go. That way you start out with a clean slate and everything will work fantastically for you. When you get ready to quilt, you're going to move to the first stitch of the design if you're not already there. And then you want to pull that bobbin thread up and hold both threads in your hand for just a couple of stitches, and then you'll stop the machine and cut those threads. Now, if you like to bury your threads in the quilt, which means you thread those threads through a needle and you push them through to the inside of the quilt, you would not want to cut your threads at this time. You would just leave them and then do that at a later date. I honestly mostly just snip my threads at this point. I'm not entering these in a fair or in a competition, and so these are going to be quilts that are used and loved, and I'm okay with just snipping the threads on that. All right, so now we're going to get into actually quilting our quilt. But the first two things we want to talk about is marking our quilt and hooping our quilt. So what you want to do is you want to mark the vertical and horizontal centers, and you can use whatever marking tool that you prefer. And so you're going to mark a line down the center. Get it centered. All right. Vertical, and then you also want to go horizontal. And then there's going to be some more marking that I do later, but right now these are the only two marks that I need. All right. We're going to place our template in the center and have a little mark on here so that I know where the top is. So when I hoop it, I'll hoop it the proper way. What you want to do is you want to line up the vertical and the horizontal markings on the template with the ones that are on the quilt. Okay. So we've got that on there, and then next we want to talk about hooping. You're going to use the largest hoop that you can for your project. So this one is a pretty good size for this. I have enough room to maneuver if I don't have it centered exactly. And you want to make sure that it's open all the way so that you are able to get that quilt in there easily. So what we're going to do is we're going to get our grippy grid and lay that out here. So, okay. All right, and then we're going to put our outer hoop on the grippy grid. We are then going to lay our quilt over it. And this is the top of my hoop, so it will be stitching this way. And then on most of your hoops, you have little notches for the centers. So if you want to kind of line those up, it makes hooping later a lot easier. However, with the placement tools that you have on your machines, it really doesn't make a huge amount of difference if you get it hooped really straight, because you can then use those placement tools and alignment tools on your machine to line everything up. So I have it basically lined up, and then I'm going to tighten this up. And then I know we have a lot of questions about magnetic and clamp hoops, and so those you can also use, and they might make life a little easier for you. Just one little thing I like to talk about is some of the really big magnetic hoops are pretty heavy, and so they tend to drag just a hair. And if you're doing a triple stitch, which we talked about earlier, the tracking of the stitches may not be absolutely precise. So I would always recommend doing a sample before you get started on that. So we're going to take this to the machine and we're going to get it centered and ready to stitch. So we're going to put this on the machine. If you have a larger quilt, of course, you're going to roll it up so that you don't have anything underneath the hoop. You don't want to quilt your quilt to the hoop. Attach your hoop. All right, bring your design up, and we want to center that design. So I'm going to use my placement tools really quickly, and wow, I hooped pretty pretty good there. So I'm making sure that my needle is aligned with the very tips of that design. All right, so I need to change this up just a little bit. All right, that looks pretty good to me and set. All right, so once we've done that, then we're going to, very important thing, we want to remove this template. You do not want to sew through the template, and you want to put it back on the little backing so that you can use it again. Make sure you're putting it on the shiny side, not the dull side. So I'm just going to lay that down. Now, we want to pull our bobbin thread up so it doesn't get tangled up underneath the quilt. All right, and then I'm going to hold this very gently, sew a couple of stitches, and then stop and snip my threads. You see how nice and close that got? And then let my design stitch. All right, so once we're finished, we're going to take it off the machine and lay it down here and remove it from the hoop. Okay, so next, so there's several different ways that people do this. I'm going to show you my way, our way, and hopefully you'll try it and like it and be able to do this again. So we like to do actually vertical, all down the vertical line, and then fill out from there. And so what you want to do is you want to think about the placement of your next template for the spacing. So if you look at these little sheep, I did the first one, and then I moved down, and I have very little, maybe like 1/4 of an inch space between the actual design here. But then here I have, looks like over an inch, maybe almost 2 inches of space. So you have to kind of play with that and see how you want your design. If you want it to be really tight or really loose, it's totally up to you. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take my template, place it underneath my original little ducks, and I want to line up here to begin with, and I want to see, is this where I want? So right here I have a little bit of space, but here I have about an inch. So now remember, the closer you place them, the more repeats you're going to have to do. So that may not be, you may not want them super close. I'm going to do about, looks like about an inch between them. So what I want to do while this is still on here is I'm actually going to measure from center to center, okay? So measure from center to center, and I'm at, oops, turn that around. I'm at 3 3/8, so to make it easier, I'm going to make it at 3.5 or approximately. Let's see what we've got here. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, I like that better. So what I want to do now is I actually want to mark a line across here at 3.5 inches. So like I said, this is just your preference, whatever you would like to do. All right. So get it all nice and straight. And then I would go ahead and just mark all your 3.5s. I'll just mark a couple. All right. Now the other thing you could do is, depending on your machine and how your placement works, you can actually measure from the end or the beginning of your design to the beginning of the next design, which happens to be 3.5. So we're doing good there. So yeah, so 3.5 there, 3.5 there. Awesome. So I'm gonna move that over just a hair. All right, so I've got my template on, and then I'll hoop and repeat what I just did. So let me get this hooped. Now, because you're going to be using the same design over and over again, but you're hooping differently each time, you want to make sure that you clear out any changes that you made to the first design in the machine, and then recenter and get everything exactly like you want it again. So that's a very important step not to forget. All right, so we'll put that in there, get our hoop, and then we'll put it back on the machine and continue stitching. All right, so I'm removing the quilt from the machine again, and then I have done my second one, and I really like the spacing. I always recommend, if you have some extra material, go ahead and do a test to see what you like, but I like that spacing a lot. And so I want to show you one that I did, and I apologize, the thread is really matching, so it's kind of hard to see, but hopefully you can get the idea. So I did the ducks all the way up and down the vertical line, and you can tell this one I used the tape. I taped down my edge before I started, and I actually stitched off of the fabric. Same with up at the top. Let me see if I can move. That's the bottom. And then over here is the top, so I've stitched off that as well. So once I have this one done, then I'm going to do the horizontal line in the center. And so I'm actually, instead of using that one because it's very light, I want to go ahead and show you how to connect these two here as well. All right, so we're going to put our template back on. And this one, you really want to make sure that you line up that the beginning and ending, and also on your line over here at this other side as well. Okay, and then we'll hoop that again. And then once you get it in the machine, it's really important to use those placement tools that you have to make sure that your start and end actually line up with the first one. All right. So I'm trying to get it as centered as possible, as centered as I can in the hoop, and then I will fine tune it when I get into the machine. All right. Now, of course, this is really small, but if this was a larger quilt, you would want to roll this all up and you can use different things, binder clips, whatever, to kind of hold it in place. But you definitely want to make sure that none of your quilt gets underneath your hoop. I can't say that enough. And the reason I say that is because I have done it before, and I'm sure some of you have done that with other embroidery designs as well. Oh, all right, get on there. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to clear out my changes and recenter my design. So I'm going to be moving my hoop until my needle is centered right over that first stitching. So see, that's not quite there. I'm going to move it just a little. All right, then I'm going to move the template out of the way and double check that they are touching. And that looks really good there. So I'm then going to go to the end and make sure that the end is in the right place. It's off a little bit, so I'm going to fine tune that as well. A little bit more. I'm super picky, and honestly it really sometimes pays off. So that looks good. So I'm going to remove my template and pull my thread up. Hold on to it and start my machine. I'm going to stop it and cut these threads. Now, I normally would quilt in a color that better matches my quilt. And you can see here, I could have moved over maybe like 1/32, one more needle point to get those really lined up well, but overall I'm pretty pleased with the results. So you would continue doing this until you have your entire quilt done. Now let me show you what you would do once you get to the outer edges. So let me get my supplies and I'll be back with you. Okay, so I have this little quilt that I started earlier, and it has all of the vertical done and the horizontal. Now, when you get near the edges, let me pull this over so it's nice and centered. You can see here that I added a piece of Ultra Clean and Tear Fusible. You can either use this or Ultra Clean and Tear Plus to my batting. So it's ironed to my batting and my backing. And I went ahead and extended my marks out onto the stabilizer. Then I hooped the stabilizer and the quilt, and I did my stitching off the edge. So you can see here I've got my quilting here, and then it comes off onto the stabilizer. So it works really well when you're hooping it. And then when you're done, you can just, I'm not going to tear this off now, but you can just tear this off, and or you can leave it on because it's not on any of my fabrics. So when I actually finish my quilt, I'll just square it up, and that will cut all of that off. So I've got some on the edge here, and then I have some on this side over here. So I'm going to extend my line over on the horizontal side, because I can, even though there's not very much here, I'm going to go ahead and show you how that would stitch. And I'm just going to use the dark thread that I have in the machine right now so you can really see it. So we're going to extend the line out onto the stabilizer, and then we're going to put our template on, and we're going to line up the stitching there and then the horizontal line there. Okay, so it's stuck to my stabilizer. Put my hoop back on. It's all very repetitive, but it's very relaxing as you do it, and it's really fun to see how it comes out. And if I were you, if you're really nervous about doing this, you can certainly do a little piece like this. I just cut a 22 by 22 piece of fabric and some batting and backing, and have been doing these in plain. Now, because this design goes out so far, I'm really only going to stitch right here. So it doesn't matter if I catch my, well, let's see, I'm going to move my template so it doesn't get caught in there, because I don't want to mess up my template. But we want to make sure that we get that that start and stop really in the right place. So we'll just hoop this up. Okay, and then I'll take it to the machine and get it all straight, and then I'll bring it back to you and show you what it looks like. All right, so now you can see where I've connected them, and then I've stitched all this out here and take it out of the hoop, and you literally can just tear your stabilizer off, and you just want to cut those little threads. And remove that stabilizer. So you can see how you do that edge to edge, off of the edge, and when you're finished you have this nice little, your design just keeps on going. So all right, that is edge to edge. Let me get the finished one so you can see what it looks like. Okay, so this is the finished quilt, and it looks really good. I've got it bound, and I just wanted to point out a couple little things. So because I did this so that you could see it, I did it in that really high contrast thread. You can also see some of the tie-on and tie-offs, and if you're doing this in the colors that blend with the fabric, you'll never see that tie-in, tie-off there. You could, if you had software, you could go in and you could change that to take those out if you know how to do that in software. I don't find it super, I don't think it stands out all that much, so I think it just looks really good. I was showing you the back. This is the front, and that is how you do edge-to-edge quilting. So we've finished talking about edge-to-edge quilting. Now let's talk about block placement and single designs, and a little bit of sizing, and then I have some other things to throw in there as well. So I made this cute little quilt out of the Harvest Quilting Collection. There's 21 designs in it, and they're just really fun. They're single and triple stitch. So all the ones that I did are actually the single stitch, because single stitch stitches a lot faster. So I'm all about fast. Okay, so when you're using a single design, the basics of them are that they start and end at the same point. And they also have start and stop without any jump stitches. And they can be single or triple stitched. So you can also size your designs. So right here, I showed this a little earlier, but our little owl here, this is sized down 20% and the full size. And what makes that nice is because it's just straight stitching, it really looks good in whichever size that you want. So you can be confident in knowing that you can change those sizes. You can also combine designs, and so on this one, let me see if I can pull this down a little bit. So we have a 7-inch block, and it is 3 different triangles, okay? So technically I could have actually combined all of this together, so this one, and then stitched it all out at one time, but I chose to stitch them all singly. But you can really have fun combining designs. So for instance, this is just a single design here, and this is me playing with just a couple of other designs. So this is the acorn triangle, and so I took 2 of them, put them together, and created a new center, which I really like. And so you can see this is just on regular paper. I like to print everything on just regular computer paper until I figure out exactly the size that I want and the design that I want. And then after that, I will print it on our Stable Stick template sheets. Okay, so we want to talk about using the templates and sizing them up and down. So underneath this quilt, I actually have another quilt. So I'm going to pull this up, and this is the same exact quilt, but with smaller blocks. So the first one is 7-inch blocks, and then this one has the 5-inch blocks. And so this one's not finished, so I can show you how we're going to place our templates so that we can finish our quilt. So this one has almost the exact same designs as the larger quilt. I did change this up a little bit in the triangles. In the bigger one, I actually had 3 different designs. In this one, I just had 2 different designs. And then showing you the little changing up on the center. I think if I made this again, I really like this this one right here. And so you just want to make sure that you get the size right. And I would mark my centers. They've kind of worn off since I first created this, but you would line up the lines with the centers of the block, and that way you're able to get that placement, see how it looks. And I think that looks really good with the rest of these designs. Okay, so that's how you would place that one. Let me also show you And don't forget, you can put them back on because they're reusable. This one is the template that I used for this triangle right here. And so I marked my center with my chalk. It's not there anymore. And then I placed my template. And then you're simply going to hoop your quilt, and then you're going to go in and make sure that that is rotated and fits in that area properly. Okay, so take that one off. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about the borders. So when you're doing your borders, you want to measure the area. I marked my centers with chalk so that I kind of had an idea of where I wanted my centers to be. And then I printed my templates for my corners. And then a really helpful thing is that when I was first working with this, I was thinking that I needed to mirror image my designs and stuff, and I ended up realizing I only wanted to rotate the design so that it would all work out perfectly. So you would place your design here now, and then I've got my template for the border as well, and I've got it all sized up, and I'll just show you a little mistake I made. It's always fun when you print on the wrong side of the template sheets. But it's okay, because then I just went in and printed it on the right side. So I'm going to put this template down. And this is my area for my border. And so you want to make sure that you have it turned the right way. And you want to match up. Let's see. Whoops. Well, that was good. All right. Okay, so you want to match up your areas that the starts and stops. So I'm going to put this here. I'm also going to line this up right along the marked line. And check to see. Okay, so that lines up really well. Now, the problem with this right now is if I put this in the hoop, I am not going to have enough fabric to hoop this. So let me show you how to fix that. Instead of having to cut my batting and backing really wide and wasting that fabric, you can actually just take your stabilizer and you can use the fusible, Ultra Clean and Tear Fusible, or what I'm using right now is the Ultra Clean and Tear Plus. So this is the stabilizer with the pressure sensitive adhesive. And then you can simply take the backing paper off. And then you're going to attach this to the back of your quilt, okay? And I try to just do it just to the edge of where the quilt top actually is, so that I don't actually stitch that stabilizer in. And then you adhere that to it. And then we have this hook right here to fit this area. So I'm going to open this up, and then I'm going to hoop this. And do you see how my fabric doesn't go all the way to the edges, but I use my stabilizer as part of my quilt. That will all be torn away when I'm finished, but that way it gives me enough stability that I'm able to then put this on the machine and stitch that part there. This comes off, it just starts disintegrating if you spray it with water, but it's easily torn away like you saw earlier, and then whatever's left will go away. And of course, once we're finished, we're going to be trimming this off anyway, so there won't be any stabilizer left on your quilt. All right, so that is placing your borders, corners, and the blocks. We have a collection called Quilters Building Blocks by Scissortail Stitches, and it is a really fun collection of really the basic fundamental blocks. So let me pull this over here so you can see it. So this has a lot of different, let's see, make 10 quilt blocks in your hoop. So there's mix and match, so 10 different blocks, and they're in two sizes. There's 7-inch and 5-inch. So they finish up at 6.5 and 4.5. And so that's how I did this particular quilt. So I want to show you the process of creating these blocks. It's pretty fun. The instructions, and I've got that here. This is just one page of it for the blocks. So it'll tell you the size of each block and what to cut of each piece. And so I pre-cut all my pieces before I started, and then I got ready to stitch. In the instructions, it calls for poly mesh fusible stabilizer, but what's nice is there's never just one stabilizer you can use for a project. There's multiples, and so you could use poly mesh fusible, you could use the Ultra Clean and Tear Plus. There's a lot of different ones you can use. I'm going to be using Fusion Fleece, which is a fantastic product. It is a very, very fine fusible fleece, and the fuse is permanent if you steam it, so it just gives a little bit of loft to that fabric as you're creating your blocks. Okay, so I can pull out my little hoops here. Okay, so you're going to hoop your stabilizer with the shiny side up. The shiny side is the fusible. And what's nice about using a fusible when you're making these blocks is as you're stitching, you can remove the hoop and you could put our perfect embroidery press cloth underneath here, and then you could actually press in the hoop. I have a little tiny iron that I use when I'm pressing in the hoop, and so it makes it really fun and easy to get that fabric to lay nice and flat. So the first thing that stitches is the placement line, so that you kind of know where everything's going to go. Then next, it's going to stitch a placement line for that you lay your fabric. So this would be the first one that you would do. You would lay this fabric right side up. And so the first fabric on each block always goes right side up. Everything else on the block will go right side down. So you can see this fabric definitely has a right and wrong side. So I laid this over my area, and it's enough so that you have a little bit of space all the way around. It's going to stitch a placement line, and then you're going to trim this away, okay? So once you've done that, you take your second piece of fabric, and you're going to take it and put it right sides together along that placement line. And you can tape it in place if you want. You could also use our point and press tool to kind of hold it in place if you don't want to tape it. That way you don't get your fingers in the hoop while the machine is stitching. Okay, once it's stitched, it's going to look like this, and then you are going to smooth that out. And I've already pressed this with my little iron on this one, and so you can press as you go. I don't recommend a full-size iron, but certainly one of those little travel irons would work well in that area. All right, so once you've done that, you are then going to stitch another placement line. So you can kind of see the repetition of this placement, place your fabric, tack down. And so once you've placed it, done the placement stitch, you're going to trim all this away, and then you're going to lay this triangle right sides together, and then you'll stitch the tack down stitch. All right. So once the tack down stitch is stitched, looks like this, and you're going to, as I said, press it open like that. The point and press tool is also really good for pressing in the hoop like this, just getting that seam nice and flat. And then the final step on this one is the tack down seam stitch or cut line. This is actually a cut line. So once you take this out of the hoop, you're going to take it over to your cutting mat, and you're going to trim along that stitched edge. And so once you have that done, you can then play with your block. And so I actually, when I was doing this one, planning it, I actually took some graph paper and I drew in some of the different blocks and with some different colors to see what I liked. And I wanted some fall colors since it was fall quilting. So once you've done all that, and then you can see here also that this is just a square block, and we actually provide that as well, just a plain square, and it gives you the cutting line so that you don't even have to measure if you don't want. You just stitch it up and you're good to go. So I'm going to lay this out so you can kind of see how this works. It's kind of fun to play with it, and I tend to kind of mess up my shapes sometimes, so I kind of pre-planned this so it would look correct. It looks a little crooked there. All right, so once you've got all your blocks done, you're then going to take this to the sewing machine. You're going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, press it, and then you have your center of your block, your quilt, and this could actually be this is a great size for a pillow, and then put your borders on. So the Quilters building blocks is really fun, especially if you have a really hard time matching up points. And we have a flying geese in there, and I always have problems with that block, but when I make it on the embroidery machine, it always comes out perfect. So that's just a quick little thing on the piecing, the Quilters building blocks. Today we have a wonderful quilting bundle for you. This one includes 2 stabilizers. You have Fuse and Fleece and Ultra Clean and Tear Plus. And these are our project size rolls, so they're a great roll to just try out, see what you think about the stabilizer. I know you're going to love it. Also, you're going to get our Stable Stick template sheets, and these are fantastic for printing out those templates so that you can get all the placement on your quilts perfect. And you get the tearaway tape. It comes 2 to a pack. I love our tearaway tape. It leaves no residue on your project, and it just holds everything in place nicely. And then you're also going to get 3 really great collections. You're going to get quilting bees and baby animal pantographs and harvest quilting. So it's a great variety of designs. Normally all of this would cost you $165.99, but today it is $59.99. So it's a really, really great price. And I know you're going to want to just add this to your cart right away. You are now ready to quilt your project. It helps to stay organized and have the necessary supplies. You can find them at your local OESD partner or at embroideryonline.com. We truly enjoy seeing your work on our Facebook page, The Perfect Stitch with OESD. If you're not a member, just go to Facebook and search for The Perfect Stitch. And then to wrap up, don't forget you have that 25% off coupon code that's good at embroideryonline.com. And the coupon code will work for everything except Spree Stitchers Club and the bundles. And of course, shipping is only a $5 flat rate shipping, so really stock up on everything you need to do your quilting. So we hope you enjoyed spending this time with us, learning how easy it is to quilt in the hoop. Thanks for joining me. I'm Kelly from OESD. Happy stitching!